She walked into the auction alone. No parents, no money, just a photo of her fallen father and a mission in her heart. No one knew why she was there, until she raised the picture and whispered 6 words. "That's my dad's dog. I'm here to bring him home." And what happened next? It silenced the entire room. The auction hall buzzed with the kind of energy that made the walls feel too close. Fluorescent lights cast sharp beams over rows of kennels, each holding a restless German shepherd, some barking, some pacing, others just watching with alert eyes. Voices rose and fell. Handlers shouting commands, bidders murmuring numbers, auctioneers calling lots over static-filled microphones. It was chaos. Organized, professional chaos, and then silence. Not complete, but enough to turn heads. A girl no more than 9 or 10 stepped through the front doors. Alone. Small. Out of place. She didn't wear the sharp uniform of the handlers or the cool confidence of the buyers. Instead, she wore a faded blue dress, slightly wrinkled at the hem, and sneakers that had seen better days. In her hand, she clutched a photograph, creased at the corners, its black and white edges worn by time. The image was unmistakable. A uniformed police officer kneeling beside a proud German shepherd, both looking straight into the lens with the ease of deep trust. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence spoke louder than any shout in the room. Her eyes scanned the room not with fear, but with focus, like she'd practiced this moment in her head 100 times. Shoulders square, jaw set. Determination far too old for her age. People parted without meaning to. A few whispered, "Who's that kid? Where are her parents?" But the girl didn't flinch. She walked straight through a sea of confusion and curiosity, the photo pressed tightly to her chest, her small hands trembling just enough to notice. Some scoffed, others stared, but a few, those who'd spent years with dogs, with duty, with loss, felt something shift. There was grief in her posture, but not helplessness. There was purpose. She didn't come to watch. She came for something, or someone. The girl moved slowly, her sneakers making soft, scuffing sounds against the concrete floor. The buzz of the auction faded behind her as she stepped deeper into the rows of kennels. Each cage she passed held a dog with powerful muscles and intense eyes, trained to serve, to obey, to protect. But she wasn't looking for power. She wasn't looking for pedigree. She was looking for him. Her eyes scanned each kennel with silent urgency. Some dogs barked as she passed. Some lunged forward, tails wagging in a desperate plea for attention. Others simply watched her with the patient stillness of soldiers waiting for orders. But she didn't stop. Not yet. And then she did. Her footsteps halted in front of a kennel tucked near the far wall. The dog inside didn't bark, didn't move. He just stood there, tall, dignified, silent. His fur was streaked with gray at the muzzle. One ear twitched, just slightly. His eyes, dark and deep, met hers. Everything around them disappeared. The girl stepped closer, one hand instinctively tightening around the photograph in her grasp. The other reached out, trembling, toward the bars. The dog leaned forward, nose brushing against the cold metal. Then, a soft whimper. So quiet, it could have been missed. But she heard it. She felt it, and something inside her cracked. They knew, he remembered. A man in a handler's vest approached, noticing her pause. He kept his voice low, almost reverent. "That one's a retired K9, he said. "Tough dog, real loyal, used to work with an officer who—" He stopped, watching her eyes widen with recognition. "I know," she whispered. Her voice didn't tremble. "That officer was my dad." The man fell silent. The girl didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed locked with the German shepherds, like they were speaking in a language only the two of them understood. Grief, memory, loyalty. This wasn't just a dog in a cage. This was the last piece of her father still alive in the world. And she had found him. The name was called Lot 42, and Shadow was led into the center of the auction ring. His coat gleamed under the harsh lights, muscles taut beneath his aging frame. His steps were measured, proud, as if he remembered what it meant to be watched, to be judged, to be chosen. The girl stood just behind the barrier, her hands clutching the photograph tightly against her chest. Her heart pounded in her ears as the auctioneer's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Starting bid, 5,000. A paddle shot up. 5,500. Another bid fast. 6,000. The crowd stirred with excitement. Buyers, trainers, private contractors, worth. They saw a warrior. The girl's throat tightened. She forced down her fear and stepped forward. 6,500? she called out, her voice louder than she thought it could be. A ripple moved through the room. Heads turned. Murmurs rose. Was that the same girl from earlier? The auctioneer blinked, caught off guard. But before he could speak, a man in a dark, tailored suit raised his paddle casually. 7,000, he said, voice smooth, confident. The girl's stomach dropped. Her palms went cold. Still, she didn't back down. 7,500, she said, quieter this time, but clear. The man glanced at her with amusement, then raised his paddle again. 8,000. Just like that, the room shifted. The energy changed. The girl stood frozen. That was everything. That was beyond everything. No more savings, no one to ask. Just her, a photograph, and a promise she refused to break. The girl stood motionless, her eyes locked on the auctioneer, on the man in the tailored suit, and most of all, on Shadow. Her chest rose and fell with shaky breaths. Around her, the room pulsed with murmurs and tension. The bid was at 8,000. She had nothing left to offer. No money, no paddle, just her story. And suddenly, that was enough. She stepped forward, the photograph trembling in her hands. Her voice caught at first, then found its strength. That dog, Shadow, was my father's partner. The room stilled. My dad was Officer Greg Sanders. He died in the line of duty last year. Shadow was there. He was with him when it happened. They were a team. They were family. I came here to bring him home. A hush swept through the hall like wind through a field. The auctioneer's hand froze midair, the gavel hovering inches above the podium. The sweeted man turned toward her slowly, eyebrows furrowed. He didn't scoff this time. He didn't smirk. He just looked. Shadow, still standing at attention in the center of the ring, tilted his head at the sound of her voice. His ears perked, his eyes softened, and his tail began to wag, just slightly but unmistakably. He remembered, not the crowd, not the lights, just her. The scent, the voice, the heartbeat. The girl took one more step forward, holding the photo higher so everyone could see. It was worn, faded at the edges, but the image was clear. A proud officer in uniform, a loyal dog at his side, a frozen moment from a life that was lost too soon. The man in the suit lowered his paddle, not out of pity, but out of respect, out of understanding. The auctioneer cleared his throat, but no words came. No one moved, no one bid. They just watched a girl reclaim something far more important than a number on a card. She wasn't a bidder. She wasn't a child with a dream. She was a daughter with a promise. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. A thick silence gripped the room, the kind that made even the fluorescent lights seem too loud. No one spoke. No one moved. The gavel in the auctioneer's hand hovered midair, suspended in a moment where everything had changed. The little girl stood alone near the edge of the ring, photograph still held high, eyes shimmering with tears, but unshaken. Across from her, the wealthy bidder remained still. His paddle hung limply at his side, his eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with something more complicated. He studied the girl for a long second, as if weighing her against a lifetime of transactions. Then, without a word, he turned his eyes to the floor, and from the very back of the room, a quiet voice spoke, gravelly, weathered, human. I'll cover the difference. Heads turned, some craned their necks. A figure stepped forward. An older man, maybe late 60s, dressed in a faded police jacket, its insignia worn but unmistakable. His silver hair was cropped short. His boots thudded against the concrete floor with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Greg was my partner, he said, eyes fixed on the girl. We worked side by side for 9 years. That dog, Shadow, saved my life once, pulled me out of a collapsed stairwell before it gave in. I owed them both more than I could ever repay. His voice cracked, but he didn't waver. If that girl came here to bring him home, then that's where he belongs. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Bidders lowered their paddles. Even the auctioneer swallowed hard, his mouth slightly open as he processed the scene unfolding in front of him. The man stepped beside the girl and placed a firm but gentle hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, startled, and then something in her expression softened. There was recognition there, not of his face, but of the weight he carried. A shared grief, a shared love. He talked about you, the man said softly. Said you were stubborn like him, brave like your mom. Tears welled in her eyes. The auctioneer finally found his voice. He cleared his throat, but it came out thick. He looked at the man, then at the girl, then at Shadow, who stood perfectly still, his gaze bouncing between them, tail slowly swaying. 8,000. the auctioneer said, almost reverently. Sold to the girl. He paused, emotion swelling in his throat. To the girl with a hero's heart. The gavel fell. A soft crack that echoed louder than any shout before it. Applause broke out. Not loud or theatrical, but real, raw. People clapped with wet eyes, some shaking their heads, others wiping tears. It wasn't about the dog. It wasn't even about the money. It was about what the moment stood for. Honor, memory, and unfinished bonds made whole again. The girl didn't speak. She just turned toward the ring where Shadow still waited, her hand tightening around the older man's for just a second before letting go. A war hero had spoken, a promise had been honored, and a home was one step closer to being whole again. The room stood still, as if holding its breath. Then the handler gave a soft nod and unlatched the kennel door. For a second, Shadow hesitated. His ears flicked, his head tilted. He moved. With a sudden burst of life, the aging German shepherd leapt forward, his powerful legs surprisingly fast for his years. His paws echoed across the floor as he raced toward her, not as a trained dog following command, but as a soul who had waited far too long. The girl dropped to her knees before he even reached her. The photograph slipped from her hand, floating gently to the floor like a leaf caught in still air. Shadow didn't stop. His momentum brought him straight into her arms, nearly knocking her over. He let out a sharp, joyful bark, then another, muffled as he buried his snout into her chest. His tail wagged furiously, his body shaking with emotion. There was no confusion in his eyes, no hesitation, just recognition, love, relief. The girl wrapped her arms around his thick neck, fingers curling into his fur as she clung to him like he might vanish. Her sobs came quickly, quietly at first, then deep and full, the kind of crying that only comes when something broken is suddenly made whole again. The crowd watched in silence, reverence painted across every face. Even those who came for profit, for business, knew they were witnessing something sacred. The older officer stepped forward and knelt beside them. His voice when it came was low and steady. "Your father would be proud," he said, his eyes glassy. Shadow wasn't just his partner, he was family. The girl looked up at him through tears, her face flushed and radiant in a way only grief and healing could shape together. Her hand rested on Shadow's head as he pressed closer, tail thudding the floor in steady rhythm. "He waited for me," she whispered. "All this time." The officer nodded slowly. "They always do." Someone in the crowd sniffled. A woman wiped her cheek. A man removed his cap, pressing it to his chest. The tension that had gripped the auction hall for so long dissolved, not in cheers but in stillness, in quiet awe. Shadow nudged the girl's face with his nose, then gave a low, soft whine, as if asking, "Are we going? Are we finally done waiting?" The girl gave him a shaky smile, ran a hand down his back and whispered, "Let's go home, boy." She stood gently with Shadow rising beside her like a soldier beside his commander. The officer remained kneeling for a moment longer, watching them with the tired eyes of a man who'd seen too many goodbyes and not enough reunions. They walked side by side, no leash, no orders, just trust. Just the invisible thread between two hearts forever bound by a man who gave his life in the line of duty. As they passed through the doors of the auction hall, the crowd instinctively stepped aside. Some clapped softly, others nodded, and many simply watched, knowing they had just witnessed a reunion not even death could stop. The girl didn't look back. She didn't have to, because what she came for was walking beside her now. As the heavy doors of the auction hall swung open, the girl and Shadow stepped into the golden light of late afternoon, side by side, heart to heart. Inside, the room remained still. No one moved. No one spoke. Some wiped tears they hadn't expected to shed. Others stood frozen, their paddles forgotten in hand, heads bowed, not in defeat, but in reverence. They hadn't witnessed a sale. They had witnessed a homecoming. This wasn't just a girl reclaiming a dog. It was a daughter reclaiming a piece of her father. It was a bond picked up right where it left off, between silence and memory, between grief and hope. Because sometimes what we lose doesn't stay lost forever. Sometimes a dog doesn't just remember. He waits for a voice, for a scent, for the promise of coming home. And when that moment comes, it doesn't need words, just a wagging tail and the sound of footsteps walking forward together.